Military tribunals behind the scenes. You know what this equals? It equals a whole lot of angry 9/11 victims and families. And that's what we're going to talk about today. You haven't heard from me in a couple of weeks, except for when we went over some Q drops about the military tribunals. And quite frankly, I was not happy with what was going on because a whole lot of nothing was going on. But behind the scenes, oh my gosh, it was unbelievable. There were a couple of things that did come out of significance in the last tribunals, which happened at the end of April, beginning of May 2019. Those were the last proceedings that Leonard Bacani and I had watched. And by the way, Leonard Bacani is at work today, so I'm moving forward to bring you up to date on some behind the scenes situations, which is why we are here. Okay, well, one of the things that happened, and we did put this in our last video, the video before last, was at the very, very end of the actual proceedings that we went to last time. Last paragraph in the transcripts, almost the last sentence, there was Colonel, which is the defense attorney to al-Baluchi, one of the alleged terrorists, and he was just saying to Judge Parrella, well, Judge, if I don't see you again, I wanted to let you know that it has been very nice working with you, and I wish you the best of luck in your future endeavors. And that's pretty much paraphrasing. And Judge Parrella was obviously taken a little bit off base when he said that. He said, I'm not really certain why you mentioned that, but yes, I have been reassigned. And I will be doing this in the beginning of June, and I will be staying until the next judge is going to be reassigned. And then they just signed off. And at that time, it was interesting because Leonard Bacani was the one sitting there in Fort Meade at the proceedings that were being CCTV'd via live CCTV from GITMO. When he heard this, it just totally shocked him. What a thing to just say. This judge has just been reassigned in the middle of the KSM et al. Proceedings, the pretrials. And so a couple of other things that went on in there that were of any kind of significance was there was an argument of whether or not we were at war. This was, again, the defense attorney for al-Baluchi. And he was saying that when 9/11 happened, technically, we weren't at war yet. So therefore, al-Baluchi should be tried in a federal court of law. And there's some interesting ramifications if that were to happen, but this is what he is trying to do. And so it went back and forth about whether or not we were in a court of law, and it went on for quite a while. And then a lot of the other proceedings that happened during that week is they were arguing whether or not a laptop should be given to one of the other terrorists for their use to help him with his proceedings. So I didn't go to the last one, but thank goodness our great and wonderful Leonard Bacani was there, and he heard this. And so we're going to get into that in a little more detail about what that means. But what I am going to do is I'm going to share our screens, and let's get right to this. Okay, now this entire proceeding that I'm going to be going over today has actually been put into an article on c-find.com on our website, and it includes all of the actual links that we have that you can look at, and goes into much more detail, along with many, many other things. So I'm going to be reading off of that, but if you want more details, please go to this article, and you will find much more there. Okay, again, titled Military Tribunals Behind the Scenes Equals Angry 9/11 Victims and Family. There is much going on behind the scenes at GITMO. In fact, there has been more interesting information going on behind the curtain than the actual proceedings of the KSM et al. Tribunals held during the week of April-May. Is this all drama, part of the deep state plan to obstruct justice, or is the swamp being drained? One important point we here at CBI News have found out is once you have waded through the endless motions put out by the prosecution or defense team, the constant arguments about the most minute circumstances, the appeals or postponements ad nauseum, once you push all that aside and focus on the steak instead of the peas, multiple pieces of behind-the-scenes puzzle began to paint a fascinating picture. Observe the timing on each incident and final result. Some reports you may already know about. Most of these, I assure, you don't know about. We, the people, are going to use critical thinking, and we are going to decide what is true and what isn't. The KSM et al. Tribunal transcripts are for your study guide from the Department of Defense website are provided here, and I have a link here for you that you click on. It has all of the transcripts from the beginning of January 2019 to the very last proceeding, which in this case is the end of April, beginning of May 2019. So they're all there for you to download. Also, before I get right to it, please look at the subscribe button that you see down below here so you can be brought up to the date news about the tribunals and other things that we're going to be bringing to you. It would be very helpful if you would do that. Okay, today's discussion points. News was recently reported about Judge Parrella from KSM et al. Tribunals a couple of weeks ago. Is he going somewhere? Could there now be a problem? Well, we just brought that up. So I'm not going to go over that again, although there is a link here where Leonard Bacani and I discuss exactly what happened. This was the video that we had done about those transcripts for that particular proceeding. So you can click on that and learn much more about it. All right, going on to the next point. Judge Parrella was airlifted stateside in the middle of the KSM et al. Proceedings for emergency. Why and when in January? And what about the timing? Well, some of this you already, some of you already know about this, but the reason I am bringing it up here is because of bringing up some points on what happened before this emergency happened with Judge Parrella. On January 28th, they were going to be discussing a number of the motions that were put forth, but one of them had to do with, again, Al Belushi. And I'm going to remind you guys, I've been telling you guys from the beginning, watch Al Belushi. This is the guy to keep an eye on. This guy is going to probably open some doors here to everything that we've been looking out for. And you'll see why in a minute. But on that day, which was the first day of the pre-trials in January 28th, they were going to be discussing about whether or not Mr. Belushi was to be talked to in a closed proceedings. And then that was postponed until the next day, which was January 29th. And then January 29th, one of the defense attorneys had gone into quite a bit of detail having to do with Al Belushi on exactly why they should not put his proceedings and make it closed. In fact, she went over in reminding, I was quite impressed with her and what she said. She reminded us that in 2018, President Trump had made an amendment to the manual for courts martial. And why this is important is George W. Bush, when the actual 9/11 terrorist attack happened, just a couple of days afterwards, he changed some of the rules for military tribunals. And one of them that he had done, that he had conducted and he had changed, is he made it that military judges who were in charge of the proceedings could close the proceedings at any time they wanted, for any reason. And they did that, obviously, for a very, very long time. It was under the guise of, protecting secrets, which that is certainly understandable, but not when it goes for any time, any reason. And so there was a whole lot of things that went on behind closed proceedings. Well, President Trump changed that. He made this executive order, and this is what the defense attorney was arguing, along with precedent all along throughout the years, and of how things could be done differently if they were so worried about any secrets being put out. It had to do with a CIA person who was actually the person that, the linguist, who identified a number of the voices from the recordings of 9/11 that the FBI and the CIA had put out there. Although they didn't say it to that degree, that is basically what it was. So there was argument. Actually, it was quite a long argument, and we do have that in the first recording that we had done on these proceedings. Well, right after that, at the end of the day, all of a sudden, Judge Parrella had the emergency, and he had to be airlifted. There it is. Whoops, the wrong one. Okay, well, it's good enough. He had to be airlifted off, and we've already told you about that. So anyway, he was back in time for the next proceedings in February, but of course, the next day, the closed proceedings, by the way, he had ruled, I forgot to mention this, he had ruled that the proceedings were going to be held under closed proceedings anyway. And that was when he received the emergency. Well, moving on from there, he was, as I said, back for the next one, but the rest of that week, there was only 2 days during the January proceedings, and then the rest of that week was canceled, and the next proceedings were going to be happening 6 weeks later. Okay, so when the next question is, was there a plane crash flying from Guantanamo Bay right after the last KSM et al. Proceedings when Judge Parrella, again Judge Parrella, made his announcement about leaving? Well, we just told you about his announcement about leaving, and it was interesting. We heard about this plane crash, excuse me. We were supposed to be leaving the next morning really early, and we heard about this plane crash, and it was kind of scary to hear this because this was coming directly from Guantanamo Bay, and it was filled with not only a number of people that are staffed there at Guantanamo Bay in GITMO, but also, who else was on there? It was a defense attorney for Al Belushi from the KSM et al. Tribunals. And so thank goodness nobody was killed, but you can go and you can learn more about this actual plane crash. It really wasn't a crash. Nobody again was killed. There was a couple of people that were minorly hurt. What is sad is underneath the plane where they kept the pets and so on, apparently some of those had drowned. But this article here goes into detail exactly what that plane crash was about and so on. So I'm not going to go into that here. I'm just giving you some highlights. All right, next point of interest. How many military tribunal judges recently have retired in the middle of proceedings or have been reassigned in the last 3 months? And have there been any repercussions? The answer is in the last 3 months, 4 have either been reassigned or retired, and 3 were actually from the al-Nashiri case, which is another military tribunal going on, and 1 from the KSM et al. So the al-Nashiri case, this article here, the al-Nashiri case is actually having to do with the bombing of the USS Cole, that trial. And this article talks about, this is going on the 3rd judge. How is it possible to have a decent trial when the judges keep quitting? Remember the terrorist attack on the USS Cole in the port of Yemen? Our precious servicemen and women died in that attack. The year was 2000. Yet only recently has there been enough traction to set a trial date for January 2019. But even then, in January 2019 trial, became a spastic on-again, off-again ordeal with death penalty charges against Saudi captive Abdi al-Rahim al-Nashiri hanging in the balance. It seemed to barely get off the ground and the presiding judge would leave. It's becoming a familiar pattern in these military tribunals, and we need to ask ourselves, why? It could be just a normal life circumstance similar to that we peons experience, or could there be something else going on behind the scenes? Only time will tell. We thank the Miami Herald for their excellent article below. And so it goes into detail what happened with every single judge that quit, moved on, reassigned, and etc. So please go ahead and take the time to look at that. I'm not going to go over it here. I'm just, again, bringing up highlights. All right. Was there some repercussions from these 3 people quitting in the Nashiri case? Well, there most certainly was. The appeals court throws out years of USS Cole case ruling, says judge acted improperly. Now, I isn't talking about all 3 of the judge, apparently just one of them. And the reason that I am bringing this up is because of what we were going to be talking about in a few minutes. A federal appeals court has thrown out years of legal proceedings in the already delayed military commission case against a Saudi charge in the deadly 2000 bombing of the U.S. warship. An appellate panel in Washington said Tuesday that a military judge improperly continued to preside over the case after he sought a job in the Justice Department beginning in 2015. Retired Air Force Colonel Vance Faith took a job last year as an immigration judge in the Justice Department. We cannot permit an appearance of partiality to infect a system of justice that requires the most scrupulous conduct from his adjudicators. So it goes into more detail here, and it is of interest to read, but that is available here as one of the links to be able to click on. Now, with the repercussions that is going on, here's the question. The other person that was just reassigned was Judge Parrella, which we just talked about. I'm going to go over that a little bit, some information that I just found out. When I spoke with Ron Fleisbeck from the Department of Defense, and I asked him, you know, was he being reassigned because of misconduct? You know, what was going on, and etc. And he said, no, actually, this was expected. I said, really? He said in August of 2018, when they go through the proceedings where the defense and the prosecution team go over the various different judges that are going to be assigned to the case, they pretty much try to make certain that that judge is going to be acceptable for the proceedings and what they are doing. And one of the things Judge Parrella mentioned then was that he had applied for a possible reassignment elsewhere, and he did not know when that was going to be and when that was going to happen. Well, the defense team pretty much ruled out that Judge Parrella was acceptable. In fact, they clearly stated that he was not acceptable because they didn't know when he was going to leave and or be reassigned and etc. Well, folks, you know who makes the decision on whether or not the judge is acceptable ultimately in the end? The judge. The judge makes the unilateral decision of whether or not he is in any way, shape, or form going to be anything that is going to get in the way of being impartial and so on. So they went ahead and put him forward. The reason this is of importance, in the very first proceedings in January of 2019, you will look, when you look at the transcripts, one of the actual alleged terrorists made the statement in open court purposely, that said, Judge Parrella, I object to being here. This is paraphrasing. I object to being here because you are not qualified. I do not see any reason for me to continue to move forward with this. Therefore, I object, and I request that you pretty much take yourself off the case. And Judge Parrella said noted for the most part, but things are going to be moving forward in that the alleged terrorist was not the one to be able to make an objection. But that is something of importance. Okay, So, with that being said, when we look at the previous case with the USS Cole and what happened with the previous judge there, they had to go ahead and throw out all the proceedings and the evidence and everything else because why? Because he was not considered to be impartial and etc. because of accepting another job elsewhere. So I asked Ron Fleischwig at the DOD, and I go, is that the same thing going to happen here? And he said, well, there isn't anything to show that yet. He goes, the only thing that can happen is if the defense team files a motion. Okay, what are the chances you think that's going to happen? Hasn't happened yet, but it just kind of told me a few things that were going on. One other thing of importance I am going to bring up here at this point. The defense attorney, Cornell, had made a point in a previous proceeding where he said, this was actually in 2008 when they were doing some other proceedings, that he was going to make a point to put down for future reference at the bottom of the transcripts that anything that was done on a fax machine, information on a fax machine or information that came through on a pager or whatever, he made a statement down at the bottom describing what a fax machine was and what a pager was. So any future people that were looking at these transcripts would know exactly what to look for and etc. because he felt that these things were going to be going on so long, by the time they got through, people would have no idea what a fax machine or a pager was. So I just thought that was a point of interest to bring it up here. Okay, let's move on to the next point. A certain commander of GITMO was recently fired because of lack of competence. Wow, that's huge. Because they don't just let these guys go. They're either reassigned or they're retired out or whichever if there's any issues. So this guy was actually fired. Well, what was it for? Would you believe murder? Okay, former commander of Guantanamo Navy base is under arrest, accused of covering up an affair and a fight he had with a base worker who was soon after found drowned in the bay. Let's go to that link. Ex-Guantanamo base commander charged with impeding death inquiry, lying about affair. I'm going to go ahead and read through some of this because it is of interest, and I'm sure most of you do not know this, but I will not read through the entire thing because it is lengthy. Guantanamo Bay Navy base, Cuba. The former commander of Guantanamo Bay Navy base is under arrest, accused of covering up an affair and a fight he had with a base worker who soon afterward was found drowned in the bay, according to an indictment obtained by McClatchy. Navy Captain John J.R. Nettleton was removed from his post on January 21st, 2015. 10 days earlier, a U.S. Coast Guard unit discovered the body of a commissary worker, Christopher Turr, 42, in the waters of Guantanamo Bay. 36-page indictment says. Well, they removed him in 2015. Nobody's heard about this. This was quite news. This actual article just came out because of him being fired. It charges Nettleton, 53, with 2 counts of obstruction of justice, 1 count of concealment of material facts, 2 counts of falsification of records, and 5 counts of making a false statement in case that, in part, relies on text messages from Nettleton's daughter to a friend while the fight was occurring inside the official residence on January 9th, 2015. Nettleton turned himself into the Naval Criminal Investigation Service, NCIS, office in Jacksonville and was taken to the federal courthouse at Jacksonville. Nettleton pleaded not guilty. The Associated Press reported and was released on bond. After Nettleton was relieved of command at Guantanamo 4 years ago, he was assigned to Navy Region Southeast Headquarters in Jacksonville while the incident was under investigation. His lawyer from Marie Colby Volke, who years ago defended an enemy combatant at Guantanamo, declared via email that Nettleton was innocent of these charges. Captain Nettleton is looking forward to the opportunity to finally be able to rebut the allegations, etc., etc. Okay, according to the indictments, a clash began on that Friday night, January 9th, during a hail and farewell party at the Officers Club up the road from Nettleton's house to celebrate the arrival of a new executive officer on the Navy base and bid the man he was replacing farewell. Outside, Turr confronted Nettleton and accused him of having an extramarital affair with his wife, Laura. The two men were separated, but Turr turned up at the captain's house soon after, and a fight ensued. The commander's daughter heard the fight, sent a series of texts to friends, including one describing her father lying on the ground. Well, my dad's really drunk and some other dude is here, and they're like getting into a fight downstairs, and I'm hiding, one text message said. She described the fight as loud and told a friend she had locked herself in her room. According to the indictment, that was the last time Turr was seen alive. It describes a series of escalating searches for him across the base, with Nettleton briefing police and other personnel that Turr had been last seen at the club. It goes on, and it talks about various things that they found, and so on. And Nettleton was like, oh, that's not important, or don't worry about that, or this is not the case, look elsewhere, and etc. and so on, until they finally found one of the bloody handkerchiefs that they found in his backyard. He was saying, don't worry about that. Well, somebody took it anyway, and they tested it, and it was the DNA of Turr and him. So along with other things, that is why they found him guilty, and that is why he's actually been fired as the commander of GITMO. Moving back. All right. Was there another delay with the case of Al Belushi and the KSM et al. Proceedings? Yes. Now I want to talk to you about this a minute. We mentioned on an earlier, on March 25th, actually, where Leonard Bacani was listening to the actual tribunals. He was live there at Fort Meade and listening to the cases going on there live. And that was when they were discussing whether or not Al Belushi should be allowed to have this information that was found on the taped recordings that the FBI and the CIA have, that was actually taped from April 2001 to October 2001. That actually included 118 different calls on 25 separate lines of various individuals discussing the how, the when, the where, everything about on exactly what was going to happen on 9/11. So in other words, folks, with all this information that's going on in the trial, where they're discussing whether or not they should use that as evidence, and I'm not going to go into the long drawn out detail of the purposes of why they did not want to use it. It was, for the most part, just briefly, they were afraid that some of the identified voices on there might have been identified because of torture that happened after the fact. And therefore, then it would not be applicable in a court of law to be able to use it. But that would only be on a federal court. Anyway, that's why they were arguing. But what was so mind-boggling is they clearly stated that they had all these taped recordings that they are keeping secret behind the scenes, and they, a linguist has identified the voices, and one of the individuals or whatever was from, they said it was from an entity. So we don't know what that is, but we need to find out. And all this is in the actual transcripts. Now, why that is important is, as I mentioned earlier, in January, Al Belushi, they were going to be discussing this, and then wound up being rolled in closed proceedings. And they did eventually hold those closed proceedings. And then it was going to be brought up again on things that they could discuss in the future on in the next proceedings. And those proceedings were delayed and they were postponed. And then the proceedings after that, when they were going to discuss this, was delayed and postponed. And they were delayed and postponed again. So all these things going on about why they don't want to show it and et cetera, and why it is not acceptable. In open proceedings, they had made perfectly clear, and this obviously is what is most important to we the people and all the victims and all the families, is they know who is behind this. They know all the individuals, they have been identified, and they are not releasing any of the names. Well, going on to the next story, there is actually a Fox News report that happened on May 13th, just a couple of weeks ago. And I'm going to attempt to play this here for you. It doesn't always come out okay on Zoom, and if it doesn't, I'll just tell you what it says. Okay, in case you couldn't hear that, to encapsulate it briefly. Okay, in case you could not hear all of that, on May 13th in New York, there was going to be an actual hearing where the judge was going to decide to release the names because the families of 9/11 and some of the victims were bringing to court demanding release of these names. And the judge was supposed to rule on that day, on May 13th, as you heard on this Fox News report. Well, the reason I am bringing this up right now of importance is I went back a couple of days later to find out exactly what did that judge rule. And not only that, because of what they were saying about the families feeling that people in Saudi Arabia, or some heads of Saudi Arabia were actually behind it, is what the families are saying on this Fox News thing. There's far more to it than that, but they're very, very angry and fed up. And I mean, it's been what, 19 years, and we know who did this, and they're not releasing the names. Okay, well, this is what's interesting. When I went and I did Google searches and I checked court records and I looked everywhere, I could not find that this case even happened. I looked everywhere. And so I went back to this Fox News link that I just happened to keep because I texted it over to Leonard for him to listen to it. So that's the only reason I still have that particular link of this release. Before I went back trying to find any updates from Fox News, I could find absolutely nothing. In fact, I couldn't even find this particular one that I just played for you. So I went back to my link that I sent over to him, and it still works. And so it's still here. It was not my imagination. I had a couple of our licensed investigators that we have with CBINE to go ahead and do some checking on their own. Maybe I wasn't looking in the right places. They looked in detail. There's nothing, absolutely nothing anywhere that this report even happened, or that even that there was a case having to do with this. So I'm bringing that up for you to consider. Okay, historical fact that I am going to bring here that does apply to this, that is of importance that you are aware, is the relevance of Judge Pohl, who was actually the judge previously before Judge Parrella. He was, Judge Parrella replaced him. He issued a secret order, and this was before Judge Parrella, issued a secret order to prevent the defense team from learning about the taped phone calls by the FBI about the 9/11 planners. Military Tribunal Transcripts and closed proceedings revealed names. Previous Judge Pohl did a secret mandate. Quote, the defense lawyer, Jay Connell, revealed the existence of the tapes as part of a protest over plans to use them as evidence at the death penalty trial of the alleged conspirators. Defense lawyers had sought to investigate their origins and later discovered that the original trial judge, Army Colonel James L. Pohl, had issued a secret order preventing them from knowing about the phone call collection system or asking questions about it. Connell, who is representing Muhammad's nephew, Amir al-Baluchi, said prosecutors secretly obtained a ruling in August 2018 from Pohl, which is just before he left, forbidding defense lawyers from learning how the phone calls were collected or investigating that. Okay, so there is a link here that you can go into more detail to read about this, but they have been doing this for a long time in preventing any information coming out, and for a long time people have been trying to hear it. So, last but not least, this is a video that was actually done in 2011. Let me read this to you. In 2011, a CIA whistleblower by the name of Susan Lindauer spilled the beans. Many listened with interest, but most looked at her as a conspiracy theorist, someone you should not believe, even though she provided significant proof anyone could fact check. Amazingly, because of new information that has come out, and additional information that is available in these transcripts that will corroborate her timeline, I highly recommend we the people take the time to watch this video with a new set of eyes. We at CBINE feel it is certainly of noteworthy interest. We looked into it, and I was fascinated by the things that she had said. This is the article. I am not going to play this to you because it is like an hour long, but she goes into detail. Basically, what she says, the lies are so much deeper than you know. Editor's note. The attached video is testimony from Susan Lindauer, filmed in 2011. Susan worked as CIA liaison and describes the world scene as it played out. She shares the conclusion that 9/11 involved both airplane hijackings and a deliberately controlled demolition scenario. The deep state wants us to believe that Iraq is our external enemy, when in fact, the deep state players themselves are our internal enemy. Her assertions have been fact-checked, and the timeline she gives fall in line with the military tribunal transcripts from the KSM et al. Pretrials in process at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, in GITMO. Not only did the CIA internally warn about upcoming airplane hijackings and terror attacks on the World Trade Center, it was all intentionally internally planned. Those on the inside knew to stay clear of the World Trade Center if they cared to stay alive. World Trade Center, at 3:00 a.m., several unmarked trucks showed up for 10 days, then were never seen again. Did they wire the building? A thermite bomb with potential sulfur in it. It's a US military-grade weapon, and it takes steel beams and turns them into molten steel, and everything just sinks into the ground. basically like what we saw happen. Maximum damage, maximum victims, an excuse for war, because war is the name of the game, deep state games. And she deducts from her CIA involvement that the orders to threaten war with the Iraqi regime came all the way from the top. President George Bush, VP, Vice President Dick Cheney, and Rumsfeld. The U.S. government knew about the upcoming terrorist attacks for months, long-term, advanced knowledge. These so-called terrorists, or shall we say assets or clowns like Muhammad Atta, who were trained and supervised by the U.S. government and were heavily tracked and controlled. There's no way they could do what they did on their own, and they didn't. I digress. Voices recorded on tape identified those U.S. politicians directly involved in planning the attacks on the World Trade Center in the months leading up to it are all revealed in tape conversations. Yet the identity of these scumbags, this is Bonnie writing, to this day are being covered up. These known names are all on tape. They've been positively identified by voice analysis, but are being withheld from us through whatever stalling efforts can be manipulated, and by whatever means possible, including corrupt courts and judges. This is the real conspiracy, the real cover-up. It's been 18 years, for crying out loud. Justice cries out. A shout out to the 9/11 Truth Alliance. Truth bombs hurt, and getting chased out of venues, one after another, becomes the norm as the 9/11 Truth Alliance comes up against continuous backlash. They are fighting for the future, not just for here and now. Using a platform of free thinking, free speech, and critical thinking presents a challenge to the societal gatekeepers who want to prevent the truth from being told. We thank them for providing their platform to Susan Landor and her message. Okay, so even though this was done in 2011, it's just as relevant today. And in fact, new things that have come out corroborate what Susan Landor says in this video. I highly recommend you get time again to look at this with a new set of eyes. All right, now with that being said, and this is very shocking to many people to hear. We've had people on our Facebook group where we discuss various news stories saying, quit, spreading fake news, this is just conspiracy theory. It's like, listen, we don't put anything out unless we check it thoroughly. We have stopped putting many things out because we weren't sure. We are putting this out because her timeline is corroborated with many things that it says in the transcripts, along with many other things that have been happening. Now, we are not a court of law, but we at CVINE can bring points of interest to the public where we feel that it is worth your while to take the time and the effort to look at this and do some of your own fact checking to see whether or not you feel this holds any water. All right, now, moving on to the next point. Franklin Graham calls for a national day of prayer for President Trump on June 2nd. It's just in a couple of days, folks. Here is a link to that, and it talks about the actual article, and it's interesting, the timing, June 2nd. And so something's gone down, folks. This is, why that day, why, etc. So anyway, I personally am going to be going out of my way to be one of the people praying on June 2nd. He gives times and dates where everybody can meet. So it is, when two or more are gathered in my name, says the Lord, to be able to all join in together to pray very hard for President Trump, who is fighting with every ounce of his being for us, So please take the time. We need prayer right now, folks. You can see how much has been obstructed, has been delayed, the game's being played. People are waking up. They know what's going on. So this is the time where things are going to be happening very quickly here. Okay, now this is the good news. Did POTUS say this was going to be the best 4th of July ever? Did he just order a complete declass? What are the chances the KSM et al. Tribunal at the end of June, which it's starting on June 17th, it's coming up here in just a couple of weeks, may be part of the whole about to be revealed? Okay, July 4th is coming up not too far away. There's a lot of things coming out. Is there going to, this is just speculation, but is there going to be a mandate to force open the closed proceedings, to force open the actual tape recordings and exactly what was found out? Now, Trump and everyone knows about this, and timing is everything. So it's coming, folks. And with the declass and everything else going on, it's all going to come down at once. So again, it's been over 18 years. Something's going on. All right, this is the end of our report tonight, but I do want to bring up some things of importance. Now, I don't know how many of you have gone to the actual CVINE website. Whoops, this is the other article. But this is our website, and a lot of you don't know this. We don't do just the tribunals. On a regular daily basis, this is the homepage. We have breaking news that we bring out, that our team of volunteers that are licensed investigators check these things out, and all these investigative journalists also. So all types of news stories, things that you can trust and you can believe in, are happening right now on the home page. And if you go down, there's also community commentary. We've got a number of excellent writings for quite a few people. We even have a section having to do with the Q drops, and we have some analysis going on there. So if you want to take a look at that. Also, we have an education section that I'm going to go over at another time. But it is teaching about all different things about history. Also has things to do with health, things having to do with natural health, actually. Many other things are in the education section. We also have a military tribunals section that specializes, and I'm clicking on that right now, that specializes in just the military tribunals, all the various different things that are happening, along with the fact that it has all the transcripts and everything available to you, as well as there is that's in this article, and so on. And last but not least, as we move back to this, we do ask you to please take a look at the CVINE donation page. We are not monetized, folks. We are all a bunch of volunteers, and any expenses come out of our pockets. So we ask you to please donate generously. We go every single month to the military tribunals, which for us is across the country. Only this time we are going to be taking a couple of our CVINE members with us while we go visit these live. So please donate, not only the monthly repeating, if you at all can, any amount is okay, but since we only have 2 weeks until the next tribunal, we have quite a bit to raise. So we request, if you are able, that a minimum of $50. We need to find 20 people that will pay $50, and we're good to go. If you can do more than that, that is great. Okay, that brings me to the end of our show this evening, and I look forward to the next one. We are going to start doing more of these. Have a good night, everybody.